Do you think this is going to end in an almighty screeching U-turn?
I think so. I think the U-turn's probably now inevitable. I think it's a sign of this new Truss government's political naivety that they didn't realise that the 45p tax cut was going to cause an almighty row. I mean, we learnt yesterday that it was essentially a decision taken without even the consultation of the cabinet. So, you know, to have this kind of small clique making this decision, making a decision that potentially changes the direction of the Conservative Party, direction of the country, without, you know, preparing the public for it.
Why does it change the direction of the country and the Conservative Party?
Well, not so much this particular tax cut, but the broader kind of tax cuts, the mini-budget, Kwarteng now saying that we're going to follow iron fiscal discipline, implying that spending cuts are coming down the line. Now, that's not what people voted for when they voted Tory, many of them for the first time in 2019. They expected an end to austerity. They expected the government to kind of have more state spending, if anything. You know, that was what was popular with the public. And now we have a slightly different vision, which I think is essentially pleasing to no one, and you've seen that from the public opinion reaction.
Bear in mind, the day after the mini-budget, the Daily Mail's headline, I remember, was, "At last, a true Tory budget."
Well, I think the Conservative Party did well in 2019 by changing from that image of the sort of typical Tory. It was that they seemed to be responding to public opinion by taking a more kind of populist direction. Whereas I think the appeal of this more sort of libertarian Truss-type government is a lot more limited.
I mean, Liz Truss has liked to liken herself to Margaret Thatcher. Of course, the lady was not for turning. Will this be the undoing of Liz Truss's premiership? Of course, we saw last week, didn't we, some letters of no confidence going in. We've heard Michael Gove and other cabinet ministers beginning to stick the knife in over the weekend. Can she turn things around enough to turn them around in the polls as well?
Well, you know, she has got a lot against her, and, you know, I do feel for her to some extent. Some of the reaction has been, you know, beyond hysterical, particularly from the kind of anti-Tory sections of the media. But at the same time, you know, she's making a virtue out of making unpopular decisions. She's saying just because, you know, she seems to think that just because something is unpopular, that it's the right thing to do. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes, you know, unpopular things are just bad ideas. And there's a lot of economic incoherence in this mini-budget, in her plans for, you know, tax cutting is not going to stimulate the economy over the long run. We're in a very precarious position economically with high inflation. You don't want to be adding, you know, you don't want to be cutting taxes at this point necessarily. So there's a lot of bad ideas in this plan, and she seems to essentially take the public rejection as almost virtuous, as a sign that she needs to plough on. Well, maybe she needs to adjust.
But Nada has got in touch, morning to you, Nada, who says you cannot say the PM's actions have not worked. They've not been given a chance. When did everyone become an expert?
Well, I think you do have to give them a chance, and you do have to. Some of the supply-side reforms that she's proposing, let's see if they have more of an effect. But again, these are not being necessarily explained to the public. A lot of those things are going to be unpopular, even if they're good ideas. We want to hear her explain why, you know, it's necessary to, for instance, deregulate housing and things like that. That could be welcome, but we're not hearing the arguments. There's not been many arguments in favour of this budget. It's just kind of been imposed on us, and that explains a lot of the reaction, I think.
Fraser, what do you make of some of the protests that we've seen outside Tory party conference? I mean, they're an annual feature, it has to be said, but perhaps not so vociferous or intimidating as they are this year. Is that a sign of the kind of febrile mood of the UK, of the public, or is that, you know, particularly nasty experience happening there?
Yeah, I think there is a kind of nasty element to it. You know, there seems to be this view seems to have taken hold that the Tories are somehow, you know, evil scum rather than political opponents, if that makes sense. So you could see that with the way Michael Fabricant, he's a 72-year-old man being harassed and jeered at. To his credit, he said he wasn't assaulted and that, you know, protest is an important part of democratic life. But, you know, let's see, there is a kind of nasty underside to these protests, I think.
Yeah. In terms of what we might, I mean, talk about, you know, a screeching U-turn. That would, if there is a U-turn on anything or a delay, you know, which is different, of course, it would just be on that 45p tax rate, presumably, would it, and not on anything else? Well,
that seems to have become the totemic issue for everyone. It seems to say all the wrong things politically, you know, that we're essentially, you know, ordinary people are going to have to make sacrifices, but we're going to make life easier for the wealthiest. So I think it was politically naive to put that forward anyway. I don't think that, but it's by no means the most significant aspect of this budget anyway. So it's kind of interesting how that has become, you know, what has inflamed so much tension.
Yeah.